大家好，我是派多光波的主编 J， 这个是我们的好朋友，也是我们的顾问 Sam。
你好，很高兴认识你。
Today we're going through a really iconic model in the world of collecting, the Daytona. This model has really captured the imagination of the collecting community. As you said earlier, this model is the hottest model.
I guess the Daytona is arguably the most collectible wristwatch in the world, of all brands, of all models.
And today we're just going to explain how Rolex went from this rather small chronograph with pump pusher, not really waterproof, to this new ceramic, very beefy thing. We start with the first one. There are two major distinctions between the Daytona families. One is manual and one is automatic. And this is their first one, the 6239.
So yes, this is a 6239. It was introduced in the mid-60s, and it's, as you said, a manual value mechanism. And this particular model was called by Rolex the exotic dial Daytona. Therefore, the dial is different from the regular production Daytonas, but it was a commercial failure. It was very unpopular. Therefore, it was only in production for maybe 5 years. Nobody wanted it. Therefore, today it's much rarer, and it's the most sought after of all Daytonas.
And the exotic dial was later referred as the Paul Newman dial by collectors. What's the story there?
Yes, because Paul Newman, he was an avid Daytona collector, and he wore the exotic dial manual Daytona.
Compared to those, this one looks rather rustic, still has the steel bezel. You can see the vintage ones sometimes have the paint kind of flaking off on the bezel, and the case is much smaller, with the pushers being smaller as well, a little more delicate.
Yep. This particular one we're discussing is...
There's no loom.
There's no loom, so I think there are between maybe 7 or 8 known like this, where people think the non-loom was requested by the Japanese market.
Right.
But like with all rare
stuff,
vintage variations, we don't really know. Rolex doesn't really tell us. People might find it interesting is how Rolex came up with the name Daytona.
Yeah, exactly. So the first one, as far as I know, is called actually the Le Mans. It's another race, not the Daytona race.
Rolex and Omega were competing for the contract with NASA to supply astronauts with the chronograph. That's why Rolex used the word cosmograph, because it sounds spacey. But then it was Omega who was awarded the contract with NASA, hence we have the Speedmaster, the Moon Watch, and then Rolex switched to sponsor the Daytona race in the States. Another thing about this watch is that the hands also don't have loom.
Yeah, this one is crazy because the dial and hands, sometimes you see hands with loom, but dial no loom. This one, it doesn't have loom anywhere on the dial. Which is a charm in vintage Rolex collecting, because there are just so many variations of dial designs. You can have oversized sub-dials, you could have...
Yes, the big eyes.
Big eyes, and also the signature at 6 o'clock, they could vary the shape and fonts.
Like Sing Song, or there's different names.
And the next significant change for the Daytona is the 6240.
Yes, so you have 6240, which has the screw-down pushers. Rolex is always pushing itself to make their watches better tool watches, right? So the 6240 has screw-down pushers, screw-down crown, hence making it more water-resistant. So you have the 6240, and then you have 6262. And they were only in production for 1 or 2 years because Rolex then updated the caliber and introduced the 6265 and the 6263. Also, those watches can be found with Paul Newman dials, and their values have soared in the past 10 years. I mean, when I started in this business, you could buy a Paul Newman for about $10,000 US.
That's crazy.
Today, for a good Panda, can be anywhere north of $500,000 US. So.
After the manual Daytonas, we arrive at the automatic movements. These ones are special because they are not using the movement from Rolex, they're using ones from Zenith.
Yes, it has a Zenith-based caliber. We have a couple here. So this is a Zenith caliber. And if you see how the watch has evolved, we have the screw-down pushers. It's much more robust. And it was in the year 2000 that Rolex then used their own in-house caliber and no longer used the Zenith-based caliber.
What I found interesting was that they went back to the steel bezel because on the manual line Daytonas, they offer you two options, one black bezel and one steel bezel. But on the Zenith-based Daytonas, they just offer you the steel bezel.
Yes.
But what's interesting to me about the Zenith Daytonas is that even though they're kind of modern, they also offer you a ton of dial variations, small detail changes over the years.
Yeah. And also Rolex, under the CEO Heinegger, they did make some unique pieces, which I was lucky enough to sell 3 platinum automatic Daytonas that Heinegger made for Gobby family, and the lapis dial and the turquoise dial made $3.5 million US.
They're really different from the normal steel.
Yes, and that's the great thing about Rolex. We have a long production. You've got this one here, which is known as the Patrizzi dial, and it's referred to when the registers oxidize, darken like this. And the term tropical, you know, with the vintage manual Daytonas, is when the dial goes brown, the registers go brown, the minute track can go brown. And it just adds that level of rarity that collectors really look for, and how they differentiate themselves with other fellow collectors.
Yeah, I usually don't care, but when I saw like a really cool example of a tropical dial, it just really made me feel that you could even recognize it as a special color scheme from Rolex.
And auction houses do name them Mocha, Cappuccino.
So this is the first automatic Daytona.
Yep.
And in the year 2000, we arrived at the first in-house movement from
by Rolex. Yes.
Yeah. And those are different from the Zenith because the sub-dials are all in silver instead of this. Because in Zenith, we have the white dial with black sub-dials and the black dial with silver, or white.
Exactly. Yes. And then the registers don't match up either.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. But the most significant change came in 2016 with the introduction
of the ceramic
Daytona.
Yeah. So again, Rolex pushing the boundaries as far as they can. Ceramic is a non-scratch resistant component. You know, whereas if we look at these, you've got various scratches on the steel, like you mentioned, the enamels come off here. But whereas the ceramic gives a very cool look and it updates the watch. And during COVID, I mean, the ceramic Daytonas skyrocketed in value. And again, that's the great thing about the Daytona, is that Rolex have a modest retail price. They could double or triple that price, and they would sell exactly the same amount. But they keep it modest. I think now, is it what, $12,500 US?
They raised it this year. The retail in China is probably 16,000 to 17,000.
Okay.
Yeah. With the newest one they introduced in 2023, I feel like the price increase was kind of justified.
Yeah, for sure.
For the first time, Rolex really changed the movement in 23 years.
Yes.
Since they introduced their first
a new caliber.
It has a new escapement.
No escapement, right?
Chronograph escapement. And even though it's probably done by machine, but they also added like
finished the movement.
They added Côte de Genève on the movement, which is kind of odd.
Because years ago, when they were servicing Daytonas, they would just take the movement out and replace it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really something.
More efficient and, you know.
But the change they made this year also, one of the biggest changes is that on these older Daytonas, the case is asymmetrical.
Right.
Meaning the left side of the case is different from the right side of the case.
They made a change, didn't they, where this is...
Yeah, the change they made is this case is symmetrical. The left side and the right side, the lugs are the same width. Also, you mentioned that you like the steel ring.
So they added a steel ring around the ceramic edge. And I feel that it just finishes the watch. It just feels more of a finished product rather than the one before it where it was bare.
They introduced a new model, but really it's rare because they looked back on a certain watch.
Yes, so what do we have here? It's named Lamar. It's in white gold. We have the ceramic bezel. New 24-hour register.
Never been done in Daytonas.
Yes, and it's sort of reminiscent of the Paul Newman. I think one of the biggest enhancements they've done here is where you have a sapphire crystal case back. And like you mentioned, the movement is actually finished with the Côte de Genève, the lines. And we have a gold rotor, or not gold?
We're not sure.
Because it's not hallmarked, is it?
Not stamped, They usually stamp it.
and it's limited in production.
Yeah.
But not a certain number. It's only going to be made for about a year, or they.
Yeah,
think,
which is cool. But you know, this is.
So cool.
this is interesting because you can see this on their website, unlike some of the like Day Puzzle you cannot see on their website, or Rainbow you cannot see on the website. This is the only one that you can have the panda dial, so not like these smaller rings, but you can have like a real white against black dial, sub dial.
But they're not. You can't get this in different dial variations, right?
No, this is like if you want a panda dial with a black bezel, this actually is the only choice. They don't even make it with like non-polymer dial.
Right.
They only give you like this Le Mans dial with the black bezel, panda watch, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
我给你的了吗?
No, 不是你给我的。
That's very cool though.
Yeah,
it's super. And I have no idea what the market price is, but I know it's significantly higher than the retail
for sure.
They still make the platinum Daytona, right?
Yeah, they still make the platinum, but the platinums are a lot cooler because all the platinum now feature a sapphire back.
Ah, that's right. Yes, so they made the change, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So finally, we want to provide some collecting tips for newer collectors or collectors that are just getting into Daytonas.
Yep, yeah, for sure. When we give collecting advice, let's always do research.
Right.
Research condition, research the price, the provenance, where is it coming from. There are different things to apply to vintage watches versus modern watches.
Yeah.
So the majority of the vintage watches, so the manual Daytonas, we first look at the dial. Now, is the dial original? Which is very, very important when it comes to Paul Newmans, because there are many fakes.
Right.
Now, why are there fakes? So a manual Daytona with a non-Paul Newman dial is 60, 70, 80,000, 100,000 US dollars. Take the dial and it will increase the value 3 to 4 times. That's why, unfortunately, there were fakes made. And I think, 10 years ago, people still buyed reloomed watches. Today, it's less and less. So really check that. Again, check the serifs in the registers. Then we've got the case. Is the case polished? Which matters more on gold watches than it does on steel. And also, the Paul Newman dial is only available during a specific period. So 1969 up until about 1973. So if you've got a 1980 watch with a Paul Newman dial on it, it's been changed.
But where would you suggest a new collector to start? Do they start with modern? Do they start with older generation automatics, or do they start with manual?
I mean, I guess it depends. I had a lady, an Indonesian collector. Her first vintage watch was a Paul Newman that she bought, and she paid 300,000 US dollars. So that was her first vintage watch because she really liked it. She did return the watch after a week because it wasn't working, and I had to remind her that it's not battery operated, it's actually a manual watch. But yeah, I guess it depends on the budget. Maybe a good way is not to spend too much, and start maybe with a Zenith Daytona. Because it's, a Zenith Daytona today, 30 to 40,000 US dollars.
You still have a lot of variations to go into.
Exactly. So with the Zenith Daytonas, or with the more modern Daytonas, you want to look for complete watches, original certificates or guarantees, box, links, polished, not polished, dial original. But it's easier to identify
for sure.
with modern watches versus the vintage ones. And
the vintage ones, because some people would say to me that they really prefer the modern because it feels more sturdy, feels more usable.
And it's automatic.
But what do you think about the more vintage ones, the manual ones?
Well, I prefer the manual watches, just because when you wind them, it's like starting a car. You've got that click.
That's true.
And also, they're much rarer because they're rarer in that the manufacturing at Rolex isn't what it is today. Steel Daytonas, I don't know, maybe there's 10,000 of them. But you've also got variations where you can really collect. So you can get a manual Daytona with pump pushers. Then you can get the screw down version.
Black dial, white dial,
white dial,
black bezel.
Yes, and I know guys who they have each reference of the manual watches. And I guess it all depends on your taste too. But really research. Really do as much research. Check comparable examples sold at auction houses. Don't be afraid to ask somebody, like ask you or me or whatever.
You like the Daytona so much. You named your dog Daytona.
Yes.
You have 2 dogs.
I have 2 dogs. One is named Daytona. The other one is chronograph.
Yeah.
So
there you go. That's how much you like the Daytona.
And also, I guess there are many reference books. You can buy. There are books by Pucci Papaleo. I mean, I don't know if you can see this. There's a Daytona book I have here.
It's an enormous book.
And it's good because if you get the books, then you can see the published examples blown up 100 times, and you can really see what to look for, and it's a good reference guide.
谢谢大家今天的收看，也希望大家能找到自己最心仪的迪通拿，然后无论是古董还是现代，都有自己独特的魅力。大家找表愉快，我们下期再见，拜拜，
谢谢。